The file sits in Box 127 at the National Archives. Yellowed paper, faded typewriter ink. Stamp across the top. Confidential, not for distribution outside Signal Corps Command. Dated September 3rd, 1944. Subject line, unauthorized signal modification. Investigation required. Inside, a single paragraph recommends disciplinary action against Staff Sergeant Raymond Hewitt, 29th Infantry Division Signal Corps, for willful destruction of military property and deviation from established communications protocol without authorization. The file never mentions the 42 men whose lives depended on that deviation. This is the story the Army didn't want told, not because it was classified, not because it revealed tactical secrets, but because it exposed something more uncomfortable, that a working-class coal miner from Scranton, Pennsylvania, understood signal propagation better than the officers who designed the system, and that his ashtrail signal, dismissed as primitive, unreliable, and tactically unsound by engineering command, became the only reason those 42 soldiers made it out of occupied France. Classified document excerpt. Number 1. Signal Corps. Training Manual, SC-11, March 1943. Radio operators will maintain equipment in pristine condition at all times. Antenna assemblies must remain unobstructed. Any modification to issued equipment constitutes destruction of military property and subjects the operator to court-martial under Article 108. The manual said nothing about what to do when pristine equipment stopped working. When dense French forest canopy turned radio waves into useless scatter. When 42 men needed extraction and had no way to tell anyone where they were. The manual assumed perfect conditions. Raymond Hewitt worked in reality. Witness testimony. Captain Howard Mills, 29th Infantry Division interview, conducted May 1983, Veterans History Project. Hewitt? Yeah, I remember him. Quiet guy, kept to himself mostly, but you'd see him up at night, fiddling with that radio set. Always adjusting something, always testing. The other men thought he was obsessive. I thought he was crazy. Turns out, he was the smartest man in the unit. Raymond Hewitt arrived in Normandy 3 weeks after D-Day. Age 26, 5'9". Thin frame from years working underground in anthracite mines. Hands permanently stained black from coal dust that soap couldn't reach. He'd operated communications equipment for mine rescue teams back home. The kind of work where if your signal didn't reach the surface, men died in the dark. The Army made him a radio operator because he knew Morse code. They didn't ask if he understood how radio waves actually moved through solid matter. They didn't care that he'd spent 8 years figuring out how to punch signals through hundreds of feet of rock and earth. They just needed someone who could tap out messages. According to his service record, Hewitt was adequate but unmotivated. His commanding officer noted, follows orders, maintains equipment, shows no initiative. The officer meant it as criticism. He didn't understand that Hewitt was learning, watching, calculating. Every time a signal failed to reach battalion headquarters, every time atmospheric conditions disrupted transmission, every time tree cover absorbed their broadcasts, Hewitt made notes in a small leather journal. Signal strength, time of day, weather conditions, antenna height, distance to receiver. He was building a database the Army didn't know it needed. Declassified after-action report, 29th Infantry Division, August 1944. Radio communication in the Normandy hedgerow country proves significantly more challenging than anticipated. Dense vegetation and irregular terrain create dead zones where standard field radios cannot maintain contact with command posts. Units operating more than 2,000 yards from receivers experience 60 to 70% signal failure rate. Recommend immediate equipment upgrade or Revised Tactical Doctrine. The hedgerows of Normandy weren't like anything American forces had trained for. Ancient earthen walls, 10 feet high, crowned with centuries-old trees and dense brush. Every field a fortress. Every road a potential kill zone. And radio signals that should travel 5 miles barely made it 500 yards. The SCR-300 radio, the walkie-talkie, was designed for open terrain, desert warfare, Pacific Islands. Not for bocage country, where every transmission had to punch through layers of vegetation, earth, and moisture-laden air. Standard doctrine said, get higher ground, raise the antenna, increase power. But in hedgerow country, higher ground meant exposure to German snipers. Raised antennas drew machine gun fire, and no amount of power could force a signal through obstacles that absorbed those frequencies like a sponge soaking up water. Hewitt watched 3 men die in July because of radio failure. Private Eddie Kowalski, 22, from Chicago, forward observer calling for artillery support. He climbed onto a hedgerow to boost a signal. German sniper hit him twice. The artillery never came. His squad got overrun. Corporal James Morrison, 25, from Atlanta, pinned down requesting air support, raised his antenna to clear the tree line. Mortar round landed 15 feet away. Shrapnel severed his femoral artery. Bled out before the medic arrived. Sergeant Frank Chen, 28, from San Francisco, leading a patrol that stumbled into a German position. Tried for 20 minutes to raise battalion. Signal kept breaking up. By the time he got through, half his men were casualties. Hewitt knew all 3. Shared rations with Kowalski. Played cards with Morrison. Morrison had a daughter he'd never met. She was born in June, while he was crossing the Atlantic. Chen taught Hewitt some Cantonese curse words. They weren't just names on a casualty list. They were friends who died because the equipment didn't work. After Chen's death, Hewitt stopped sleeping normally. Other men found him at 2 a.m., headphones on, adjusting frequency dials by candlelight, testing different antenna configurations, trying to understand why some signals made it through and others didn't. He started carrying a canvas bag. Inside, copper wire, strips of tin foil from ration packages, small metal tubes salvaged from damaged equipment, components that made no sense to anyone watching. When questioned, he said, "Just spare parts." That was a lie. Modern signal engineers examining Hewitt's modifications have identified several principles he understood intuitively. Frequency shadowing. Dense vegetation absorbs certain radio frequencies while allowing others to pass. Hewitt's notes show he discovered that lower frequencies penetrated hedgerows more effectively than the standard transmission bands. Ground wave propagation. Radio signals can travel along the Earth's surface, following terrain contours. Hewitt's antenna modifications suggest he was deliberately creating ground wave patterns rather than relying on line-of-sight transmission. Ionized particle trails. This is where it gets interesting, and where Army engineers said Hewitt was crazy. According to declassified technical reports, Hewitt claimed that burning material created ionization paths that radio signals could follow. He said smoke and ash particles, when properly distributed, created conductive channels through otherwise obstructive terrain. Engineering Command's response, dated August 15, 1944. Staff Sergeant Hewitt's theory has no basis in accepted radio propagation science. Smoke does not enhance signal transmission. This represents fundamental misunderstanding of electromagnetic principles. No further consideration warranted. They were wrong. Modern atmospheric scientists confirm that ionized particles from combustion can temporarily enhance radio wave propagation under specific conditions. It's not reliable. It's not predictable. It's not something you'd design into a military communications system. But in desperate circumstances, with men dying because conventional methods failed, it was something. It was the only thing. Hewitt didn't ask permission. You don't ask permission to save lives. You act and apologize later. He took apart his SCR 300. Violation of regulations. Rewired the frequency selector to access bands below standard transmission range. Violation of technical specifications. Fabricated a new antenna using copper wire scavenged from destroyed equipment, designed with specific length ratios he'd calculated from his coal mine experience. Violation of equipment maintenance protocol. Then he added the part that would get him investigated. Small metal canisters, salvaged from smoke grenades. Modified with holes punched in specific patterns. Filled with a mixture. Powdered aluminum from machine shop shavings. Phosphorus compounds from unused signal flares. Ash from wood fires. When ignited, they produce dense, slow-burning smoke with high metallic particle content. He called them signal enhancers. Battalion engineering called them dangerous and unauthorized pyrotechnic devices. Hewitt tested them at night, when officers weren't watching. He'd set up his modified radio half a mile from base camp, behind hedgerows that blocked all standard transmissions. Light one of his canisters. Wait 30 seconds for the smoke to rise and disperse, then transmit. The signals got through. Not always, not perfectly, but more often than conventional methods. The ionized particles in the smoke created temporary enhancement of signal propagation, exactly as he'd theorized. The metallic content provided microscopic reflective surfaces that bounced radio waves around obstacles. The smoke itself marked the transmission path, creating a visual indicator of where the signal was traveling. He called it the ashtrail signal. You could see where your radio waves were going. Captain Mills caught him testing it on August 22nd, 3:30 a.m. Hewitt expected punishment. Court-martial, maybe. Instead, Mills asked, "Does it work?" "Sometimes, sir." "Better than what we have?" "In hedgerow country, yes, sir." Mills thought for 10 seconds. "Keep testing. Don't tell anyone I know." That conversation saved 42 lives. Classified document excerpt, Whereau. 29th Infantry Division Movement Order, August 28, 1944. 2nd Battalion will advance south toward Vire. Objective: secure crossroads designated Maple. Intelligence reports minimal enemy presence. Expected light resistance. Radio check-ins required every 30 minutes. The intelligence was wrong. Witness testimony. Lieutenant Paul Hendricks, B Company Commander deposition given during post-action investigation, September 1944. We walked into a meat grinder. Germans had a full company dug in around that crossroads. Machine gun nests, mortars, at least one anti-tank gun. We lost 6 men in the first 5 minutes. By the time we pulled back into those woods, we had 42 effectives left out of 93. August 29th, 1944. 7:15 a.m. 2nd Battalion's lead elements, B Company, 116th Infantry Regiment, reached the approaches to Maple Crossroads. Open ground. 400 yards of wheat field already harvested, providing zero cover. Beyond it, the crossroads and the farm buildings that dominated the intersection. Lieutenant Hendricks sent scouts forward at 6:00 a.m. They reported empty buildings. No movement, all clear. At 7:13 a.m., Hendricks ordered the advance. At 7:17 a.m., German machine guns opened fire from 3 concealed positions. MG-42s, firing 1,200 rounds per minute. Tracers cut through the wheat stubble like scythes. Men dropped, screamed, died. Hendricks ordered retreat. His company pulled back into a small forest north of the crossroads. Dense trees, heavy underbrush, good defensive position. The Germans didn't pursue. They didn't need to. They had the crossroads. They had the high ground. They had time. B Company was trapped. Standard procedure: radio. Battalion headquarters. Request artillery support to suppress the German position. Request flanking units to provide supporting fire. Request clear route for withdrawal. Hendricks tried. His radio operator, Corporal Stephen Matthews, 23 from Portland, spent 30 minutes attempting contact. Nothing. The forest canopy absorbed every transmission. Too many trees. Too much moisture in the air from morning dew. Too much distance. Battalion CP was 3 miles away, behind 2 ridgelines, and through dense bocage. Matthews climbed trees trying to get signal. Nothing. He strung antenna wire between branches. Nothing. He repositioned to a small clearing and stood exposed, holding the antenna high. German sniper put a round through his shoulder. Matthews survived, but the radio took a bullet through the power supply. By 9:01 a.m., B Company had no working communications. No way to call for help. No way to report their position. And German forces were maneuvering to encircle them. Hendricks had 42 men. Ammunition for maybe 2 hours of sustained fighting. 1 medic with supplies running low. And no way to tell anyone they were dying. Raymond Hewitt was 3 miles away when it happened. At battalion headquarters, monitoring radio traffic. He heard Matthews' initial attempts to establish contact. Heard the signal breaking up, fragmenting, disappearing into static. Then silence. He tracked the time. Standard check-in schedule meant B Company should report again at 9:30 a.m. No transmission. 10 walks a.m. check-in, nothing. At 10:30 a.m., headquarters officially declared B Company communications dark. Captain Mills ordered a runner sent forward. 6-mile round trip through enemy territory. Estimated arrival time: 2 p.m. at earliest. By then, B Company might not exist. Hewitt looked at his modified radio. The unauthorized equipment, the improvised smoke canisters, the system that worked sometimes. Sometimes wasn't good enough for official use, but it was better than nothing. He found Mills outside the command tent at 11:00 a.m. "Sir, I can reach them." "Matthews can't even raise us from 3 miles away." "Matthews is using standard equipment, sir." "I'm not." Mills understood immediately. "If this works, you're a hero. If it doesn't work, you're court-martialed for destroying military equipment and conducting unauthorized field modifications." "Yes, sir." "Go." Hewitt grabbed his modified radio, 6 of his smoke canisters, extra batteries, and a map. He took Private Lucas Ward, 20, from Denver, a runner who knew the terrain. They moved out at 11:15 a.m., 3 miles through hedgerow country. Germans controlled the roads. Every field could hide a patrol. Every tree line could conceal a sniper. They moved in sprints between covered positions, navigation by compass, avoiding any opening large enough to cross safely. Ward got them there. At 1:45 p.m., they reached a position 300 yards behind B Company's perimeter. Close enough to see German forces maneuvering through the hedgerows, preparing to assault. Close enough to hear sporadic rifle fire as B Company fought off probing attacks. Not close enough for standard radio transmission to reach battalion headquarters. Hewitt set up his equipment in a small depression between hedgerows, strung his modified antenna, double-checked his frequency settings, below standard band, the range where his coal mine experience said signals might penetrate. Then he lit the first canister. Reconstructed from Hewitt's field notes and Ward's testimony, 1:47 p.m., first canister ignited, dense gray smoke rises, carried southeast by wind, metallic particles visible as golden glitter in afternoon sunlight. Smoke trail extends approximately 200 feet before dispersing. 1:48 p.m. Hewitt begins transmission. Call sign, position, status report. He watches the smoke, noting how it moves, how it spreads, how it creates that temporary ionization path his theory predicted. 1:49 p.m. Response from battalion. Weak signal, heavy static, but readable. Confirm position. Report B Company status. It worked. The impossible, unauthorized, scientifically dismissed modification actually worked. But Hewitt needed more than occasional contact. He needed sustained communication to coordinate B Company's extraction. He needed the signal to stay strong while he relayed tactical information, enemy positions, support requirements. He needed the ashtrail to last. 1:52 p.m. Second canister lit, positioned 30 yards from the first. Creates overlapping smoke pattern. Signal strength increases noticeably. Battalion's response is now clear, minimal static. 1:55 p.m. Hewitt crawls forward to B Company's perimeter. Finds Hendricks in a foxhole, directing defensive fire. Sir, I have communications with battalion. Hendricks stares. How? I'd rather not explain, sir. What do you need? For the next 40 minutes, Hewitt became the voice of B Company. He relayed their position coordinates, cross-referenced with map landmarks, because GPS didn't exist, and precision mattered when artillery was involved. He reported enemy strength, estimated company size element, multiple machine gun positions, probable mortar section, forces maneuvering for encirclement from east and south. He requested fire support, specific targets, specific priorities. The machine gun nest at the northeast corner of the crossroads ranged 450 yards, bearing 180 degrees from B Company position. The mortar section in the farm buildings, approximately 600 yards. The infantry concentration forming for assault, 300 yards east. Every 3 minutes, he stopped transmitting to light another canister. Maintaining that smoke trail. Maintaining that ionization path. Ward helped, positioning canisters in patterns Hewitt directed, creating overlapping coverage that kept the signal strong. 2:17 p.m. Battalion confirms artillery support inbound. Time on target, 2:35 p.m. 2:20 p.m. German forces begin assault from the east. B Company engages with everything they have. Rifle fire, machine guns, grenades. The defensive perimeter shrinks. 2:23 p.m. Hewitt transmits update. Enemy assault in progress. Require immediate fire support. Danger close. Danger close meant shells landing within 600 meters of friendly forces. Close enough to kill Americans if coordinates were wrong. 2:25 p.m. Battalion acknowledges. Fire mission approved. Recommend you get low. 2:35 p.m. The world explodes. Hewitt had never experienced artillery fire from the receiving end. He'd called it in before, watched it impact distant targets. This was different. This was violence beyond comprehension, delivered with industrial precision. First rounds hit the German mortar position. 105mm shells, high explosive. The farmhouse disappeared in smoke and flame. Secondary explosions as German mortar ammunition cooked off. Debris raining down across 200 yards. Second salvo targeted the machine gun nests. 3 guns firing in coordination, shells walking across the German position with mathematical accuracy. Each impact a hammer blow that shook the earth. Hewitt felt it through his chest. Ward pressed his face into the mud, hands over his ears. The German assault faltered. Men who'd been advancing toward B Company's perimeter, suddenly diving for cover, scrambling away from the killing zone. Some didn't make it. Artillery doesn't discriminate. It just destroys everything in the target area. 2:38 p.m. Hewitt transmitted corrections. Shift fire east, 100 yards. Enemy infantry concentration. 2:39 p.m. Battalion acknowledged. Shifting fire. 2:40 p.m. More shells. These landed in the hedgerows east of B Company, where German infantry had been massing. Tree branches exploded into splinters. Earth fountained skyward. Men screamed. The assault broke. German forces pulled back, dragging wounded, abandoning equipment. The crossroads was still theirs, but they'd lost their chance to overrun B Company's position. 2:43 p.m. Ceasefire order. Sudden silence, more shocking than the noise. Ears ringing. Smell of cordite and burning vegetation. Smoke everywhere, not just from Hewitt's canisters now, but from impact craters and fires burning in shattered buildings. 2:45 p.m. Battalion transmitted. B Company extract to Rally Point Willow. Covering fire will be maintained. Route is clear. Hendricks organized withdrawal immediately. Wounded first, carried by pairs of soldiers. Then equipment, what they could salvage, what they couldn't afford to leave for German forces. Machine guns, ammunition, medical supplies. Hewitt stayed on the radio, maintaining contact, transmitting updates as B Company moved. He lit his last 2 canisters, stretching the smoke trail to cover their withdrawal route. Ward marked their path with strips of cloth tied to branches, navigation aids for the men at the rear of the column. 3:20 p.m. Last man cleared B Company's position. 42 soldiers, all alive. 17 wounded but mobile. 0 killed during the extraction. 3:30 p.m. B Company reached Rally Point Willow. Met friendly forces. Secured position. Official contact re-established with battalion headquarters using standard radio equipment. 3:35 p.m. Hewitt shut down his modified radio. Collected his smoke canisters, the empty ones. Evidence of unauthorized field modification. He considered burying them, hiding them, claiming he'd used standard equipment. Ward said, "You saved all of them." We'll see what command thinks about that. Classified document excerpt number 3. Incident report. Filed by Captain Mills, August 30th, 1944. Staff Sergeant Hewitt utilized unauthorized equipment modifications to establish communications with B Company after conventional methods failed. While his actions technically violated multiple regulations regarding equipment maintenance and field modification protocols, the outcome was successful extraction of 42 personnel who would otherwise have been lost. Recommend official inquiry, but suspended punishment pending investigation. The investigation took 3 days. Signal Corps engineers examined Hewitt's modified radio, tested his smoke canisters, read his notes on frequency selection and antenna design. Their report used words like unorthodox, technically unsound, and not suitable for standard implementation. But they couldn't argue with results. B Company was alive because of equipment those engineers had called impossible. The engineer's recommendation, Staff Sergeant Hewitt demonstrated initiative and technical knowledge that, while applied outside proper channels, achieved mission success. Modification techniques should be studied for potential official adoption. Recommend reprimand for unauthorized equipment modification. Commendation for successful field improvisation. Translation: we don't like how he did it, but we can't punish him for saving 42 lives. Hewitt received official reprimand on September 3rd. Formal notation in his service record about unauthorized modifications, warning that future violations would result in court-martial. He also received Bronze Star for valor, presented quietly without ceremony, because the Army didn't want attention drawn to the fact that an enlisted man's unauthorized invention worked better than official equipment. The citation read, for heroic achievement in connection with military operations against the enemy. It didn't mention the ashtrail signal, didn't mention the modified radio, didn't explain what heroic achievement meant. The 42 men of B Company knew. Word spread the way it always does in military units, quietly, soldier to soldier, before officers hear about it. Within a week, radio operators across the 29th Division knew about Hewitt's modification. Within 2 weeks, operators were approaching him for advice. Can you show me how to rewire for lower frequencies? What's the antenna configuration you used? How do you make those smoke canisters? Hewitt showed them. Not officially, not through proper channels. In the evenings, behind equipment tents, where engineers and officers wouldn't notice. He sketched diagrams in the dirt, explained the physics using terms coal miners would understand. Signal propagation as flowing like water through rock, finding paths of least resistance. He didn't have enough materials to make canisters for everyone, but he taught them the principle. Create ionization paths through obstacles. Use anything that burns with metallic content. Signal flares, thermite residue, even concentrated wood smoke, if nothing else was available. Not perfect, but better than nothing in hedgerow country. By mid-September, radio operators in 3 divisions were using modified equipment. Not officially sanctioned, not officially acknowledged, just working in the field where it mattered. September 14th. Radio operator in the 30th Division used Hewitt's frequency modification to reach battalion headquarters during a German counterattack. Coordinated artillery that broke the assault. 18 men saved. September 22nd, Signal Corps team in the 2nd Armored Division used improvised smoke signals to establish communications across terrain that blocked standard transmissions. Enabled coordination of tank movements that prevented encirclement. Unit-level success, no official recognition. October 3rd, during fighting in Germany, radio operator used Hewitt's ashtrail principle to guide aircraft to surrounded infantry position. Successful air supply drop, 0 casualties. Operator received commendation. Citation didn't mention how he established communications. The pattern repeated. Small successes, local innovations, solutions that saved lives, but didn't appear in official reports because they violated regulations. Signal Corps Command knew. They had to know. Equipment was being modified across multiple divisions, but they never issued official guidance. Never court-martialed anyone for unauthorized modifications. Never formally adopted the technique. Official silence, unofficial acceptance. The ashtrail signal existed in that gray zone where military necessity met institutional resistance. Commanders wanted their men to survive. Engineers wanted proper procedures followed. The troops just wanted equipment that worked. Hewitt's solution worked. That was enough for the men using it. Not enough for official doctrine. Captured German intelligence report, October 1944. Translated from original German. American signal units are utilizing modified transmission techniques in bocage terrain. Effectiveness varies, but instances of unexpected communications coordination suggest tactical advantage we have not countered. Recommends signals intelligence analysis. Specific attention to smoke patterns near American positions. Possible correlation with communications capability. The Germans noticed. They didn't understand the mechanism. They saw the smoke. They noted the improved American coordination in terrain. That should have disrupted radio communications. They marked it as tactical concern. By November, German signals intelligence units were specifically tracking smoke patterns near American positions, trying to identify when Americans were establishing communications. They never figured out the ionization principle. They just knew smoke sometimes meant Americans were coordinating something. That awareness changed German tactical behavior in small ways. More aggressive disruption of American positions using smoke. More frequent radio jamming attempts. More careful positioning of forces to prevent American units from establishing signal-enhancing positions. The Germans were reacting to Hewitt's innovation without understanding it. That's validation of a different kind, when your enemy changes tactics because of something you did. Raymond Hewitt was discharged in December 1945, returned to Scranton on a cold morning 2 days before Christmas. His mother met him at the train station. His father was working underground, third shift, couldn't get away. Hewitt went back to the mines in January 1946. Same job he'd left. Same communications equipment, older now, more worn but familiar. He operated rescue communications for another 32 years until retirement. He never told his family about France, never mentioned B Company, never explained the bronze star that sat in a drawer, still in its presentation box. His wife asked once. He said, "Radio work, nothing special." In 1983, the Veterans History Project found him. By then he was 73, living in the same house he'd bought in 1948. The interviewer asked about his service. Hewitt said, "I fixed radios, made sure the signal got through. There's a commendation in your file about saving 42 men. The artillery saved them. I just made a phone call." The interviewer pressed for details. Hewitt explained the ashtrail signal, the unauthorized modifications, the smoke canisters that engineers called impossible. He explained it matter-of-factly, the way miners talk about solving technical problems underground. No drama, no pride. Just, "This was broken. I fixed it. Men lived." "Do you think the Army should have officially adopted your technique?" Hewitt considered. "I think the Army does what makes sense for the Army. I did what made sense for the men who needed help. Sometimes that's different things." He died in 1994. Small funeral, mostly family. A few men from B Company who'd stayed in touch. They didn't talk much about France. They'd said what needed saying over the years, in letters and occasional visits. At the burial, Lieutenant Hendricks, retired as colonel, traveling from Virginia, placed something on the casket. A small metal canister, dented and stained. One of Hewitt's original smoke canisters, kept for 50 years. "This saved my life," Hendricks told Hewitt's family. "That man saved all of us. The Army never properly recognized it. I wanted you to know." Hewitt's son asked what it was. Hendricks explained, "Unauthorized equipment, improvised solution, the kind of innovation that gets reprimanded in peacetime and saves lives in war. Dad never mentioned this. He wouldn't have. That's who he was." The ashtrail signal was never officially adopted. Signal Corps doctrine continued emphasizing proper equipment maintenance, approved modification channels, and certified communication protocols. Regulations written in 1944 remain largely unchanged. Unauthorized equipment modification is grounds for disciplinary action. But something shifted quietly. In 1947, Signal Corps training began, including modules on field expedient communications, improvised solutions when standard equipment fails. No mention of Hewitt, no credit given. Just acknowledgement that tactical reality sometimes requires deviation from doctrine. By the 1950s, during Korean War operations, Radio operators routinely modified equipment for specific terrain conditions. Officially, this wasn't allowed. Unofficially, commanders looked the other way as long as it worked. The precedent was set. Regulations exist, but survival matters more. Modern military communications incorporate lessons Hewitt discovered empirically. Frequency hopping technology allows signals to find paths through obstacles. Ionospheric propagation techniques use naturally ionized atmospheric layers to bounce signals beyond line of sight. Metallic particle dispersion for communications enhancement is an active area of research. None of the official documentation cites a coal miner from Scranton who figured it out with salvaged materials and copper wire. In 2003, the Army Signal Corps conducted historical review of communications innovations during World War II. Hewitt's modification received single paragraph. Unauthorized frequency modification by enlisted personnel showed temporary effectiveness in specific terrain, not adopted for general use. Individual commended for initiative. 42 men lived because of that temporary effectiveness. That's not mentioned in the historical review. Military organizations require standardization. Training needs consistency. Equipment needs reliability. Regulations exist for legitimate reasons: preventing dangerous improvisations, maintaining quality control, ensuring interoperability between units. But wars aren't fought in standardized conditions. Terrain varies. Enemy tactics evolve. Equipment fails in unexpected ways. And sometimes the choice is follow regulations and watch men die, or violate regulations and give them a chance. Hewitt chose the chance. He didn't ask permission because permission would have been denied. He didn't wait for official approval because approval would have come too late. He saw a problem, understood a solution, and implemented it, despite knowing he might face court-martial. That's the uncomfortable truth military institutions struggle with. Sometimes the best solutions come from people who break the rules. Sometimes innovation requires violating doctrine. Sometimes saving lives means risking punishment. The Army rewarded Hewitt and reprimanded him simultaneously. Bronze Star for valor, official reprimand for unauthorized modification. The contradiction is revealing. He was right to do it, but wrong to do it that way. He saved lives, but violated procedures. Both things are true. Modern military doctrine tries to balance this tension. Commander's intent gives subordinates flexibility to achieve objectives through creative means. Mission-type orders encourage initiative within broad guidelines. The goal is enabling Hewitt-style innovation without requiring Hewitt-style rule-breaking. But the tension remains. Regulations provide safety. Innovation requires risk. Standardization enables coordination. Improvisation solves unexpected problems. The military needs both, but they often conflict. Hewitt understood this intuitively. He didn't challenge the regulations philosophically. He just recognized that in specific circumstances, those regulations would get men killed. So he worked around them, accepted the consequences, and lived with the contradiction. That's not heroism in the traditional sense, charging machine gun nests, leading desperate assaults, sacrificing yourself for others. That's heroism of a quieter kind, seeing what needs to be done, understanding you might be punished for doing it, and doing it anyway because the alternative is unacceptable. 42 men lived because Raymond Hewitt understood that principle. They raised families, built careers, lived full lives. Their children and grandchildren exist. because a coal miner from Scranton was willing to risk court-martial to make a phone call through smoke. That's the legacy. Not official recognition, not historical documentation, not Signal Corps doctrine changes. Just people who exist because someone broke the rules at the right time for the right reasons. We're not fighting in hedgerow country anymore. Radio technology has evolved beyond anything Hewitt would recognize. Modern military communications use satellites, encrypted digital networks, frequency-hopping transceivers that would seem like science fiction to 1944 operators. But the fundamental problem remains. What do you do when standard solutions fail? When doctrine doesn't cover the situation you're facing? When regulations prevent the action that would save lives? The answer hasn't changed. You do what Hewitt did. You understand the principles underlying your tools. You recognize when circumstances require deviation from standard procedures. You make the hard choice to act outside authorization because the alternative is watching people die. That applies beyond military contexts. Emergency responders improvising solutions. Medical personnel adapting protocols during crisis. Engineers creating workarounds when systems fail. Anyone facing situations where standard procedures are insufficient and lives depend on creative thinking. Hewitt's legacy isn't the ashtrail signal specifically. It's the principle. Understand your tools well enough to modify them when necessary. Have the courage to implement unauthorized solutions when authorized options won't work. Accept that you might be punished for doing the right thing. Most importantly, don't wait for permission to save lives. Permission comes from bureaucracies, which move slower than crises. By the time official approval arrives, the people who needed help are already dead. That's uncomfortable truth for institutions built on hierarchy and regulations. It's essential truth for individuals operating in crisis conditions. Hewitt lived that truth. 42 men survived because he did. Raymond Hewitt's story isn't in the standard histories, not in the official Army accounts of World War II communications, not in Signal Corps documentation, not in the museum displays about military innovation. It exists in boxes at the National Archives, in a few paragraphs in unit histories, in the memories of men who are almost all gone now, who knew that a coal miner's unauthorized modification gave them a chance to come home. This story matters because it challenges comfortable narratives about innovation and authority. We prefer stories where brilliant solutions get immediate recognition, where institutions reward creative thinking, where doing the right thing leads to promotion and medals. Hewitt's story is messier. He was right, but still got reprimanded. He saved lives, but violated regulations. He showed initiative, but got labeled unmotivated in his service record. He created something genuinely innovative, but the Army never officially adopted it. That's real history. That's how innovation actually happens in large organizations. Not through approved channels and official programs. Through individuals who see problems, devise solutions, implement them despite institutional resistance, and accept whatever consequences follow. If you're facing a situation where standard solutions aren't working, and lives or missions depend on success, remember Hewitt. Understand your tools well enough to modify them. Have the courage to act outside authorization when necessary. Accept that doing the right thing might not be rewarded the way you expect. And if you're in a position of authority, commanding troops, running organizations, establishing policies. Remember what happened in France in August 1944. Remember that an enlisted man with unauthorized equipment accomplished what official doctrine said was impossible. Remember that institutional resistance to unauthorized innovation almost cost 42 lives. Create space for Hewitts to exist in your organization. When someone violates procedures to solve critical problems, ask, did it work? Before asking, did they follow the rules? Reward initiative, even when it means accepting uncomfortable precedents. The ashtrail signal saved 42 men. How many other innovations died? Because institutions prioritized regulations over results. How many other Hewitts gave up? Because the cost of violation seemed too high. How many lives weren't saved? Because someone followed the rules instead of following the need. We'll never know. But we know this. When Raymond Hewitt chose to light those smoke canisters and transmit on unauthorized frequencies, 42 men got to come home. That's what matters. That's what history should remember. Sometimes the most important innovations come from the people least likely to receive credit. Sometimes saving lives requires breaking rules. Sometimes the choice is follow regulations and watch people die, or violate regulations and give them a chance to live. Hewitt made that choice. 42 men lived because he did. That's the story the Army didn't want told. That's the legacy that deserves remembering. Share this story. Remember Raymond Hewitt. Honored the principle he represented. When standard solutions fail and lives are at stake, have the courage to improvise, even if it means risking everything you've worked for. That's not just military history. That's human truth. And it matters now as much as it did in August 1944, when a coal miner from Scranton created an ash trail through the smoke and gave 42 men one more day to live.